Welcome to In Our Town, Conversations with Springfieldians Making a Difference. I'm your host, Tom Carlson, publisher of the Springfield Daily Citizen. If you'd like to comment on this episode, our email is inourtown@sgfcitizen.org. We'd love to hear from you. My guest today is Springfield Mayor Ken McClure. Because of term limits, 2024 will be his last full year of service to the city of Springfield. As an observer of City Hall for many decades, it is my opinion that no one has been more qualified for the position of mayor. During his career, Ken has worked in the Missouri legislature, he's chaired the Missouri Public Service Commission, and he was chief of staff for former Governor Matt Blunt. On the local scene, he had served as the Associate General Manager at City Utilities and later as the Vice President at Missouri State University. A lifelong resident of Springfield, few people have as broad and deep understanding of Springfield as Ken McClure. In our conversation, I wanted to ask him what was on his bucket list for his last year as mayor, and finally to get his take on the position himself. Well, Ken, I want to welcome you to In Our Town.
Well, Tom, thank you. I'm grateful for the invitation.
Well, certainly. Well, this is your last year as mayor. There's lots happened. I know you still have a lot of things that you would like to get accomplished, but just to pause and take a breath as you look back, what are some of your big takeaways as having been mayor?
Well, first, I never dreamed I would ever run for office. I've worked with a lot of people and for a lot of people who have run for office, and I never, ever thought that. And so to do this was a big leap for me, and to see your name on the ballot.
Yeah.
Wow. But having said that, I ran initially for council in 2015, and that helped a lot, just to watch how the council works and how the intricacies go on. And so even though I think I could have become mayor without having served that, it helped a lot. So when I became mayor, the initial issue that we had was how to fund some of our public safety needs. For example, former fire chief David Hall had been in front of council saying, we've got to have 2 new fire stations.
Right.
We can't serve the areas like we need to. Well, we didn't have any money for that. And then he said, if we don't, we're going to have to shut some down and reallocate staff. And we got to looking at the council, how in the world are we going to do this? And then we came up with an idea collectively of the level property tax, which has been in place since the mid-'90s and was used for stormwater issues and that type of thing. But as you bought bonds and paid them down, then you had a little bit of headroom in there.
That's right, yeah.
And so we said, well, why can't we ask the public to let us take that headroom and use that for our capital needs for public safety? And so we did, no tax increase. And we took that to the ballot in November of 17, and I was elected in April of 17, so I'd just been in office 6 months or so. Overwhelming support on that. So again, no tax increase, but we were able to build 2 new fire stations, which we needed, and they're both up and operating right now. We're able to renovate several, get some needed capital expenditures for our police departments. And so we said, the voters were good. They were kind. They looked at it and said we needed to do that. And that really kind of set the tone, I think, for where we needed to go. We had a 1/4 and an 8-cent sales tax for transportation for capital improvements, and those would come up in 3- and 4-year increments. And again, the public was all very supportive of that. So we spent a lot of time initially looking at just the capital needs of the city and how we needed to fund those. And so we got off on a good start that way. We began talking about a comprehensive plan, and you would remember the last one, Vision 2020.
Oh, absolutely.
You were very much a part of that process, but that was 1999, 2000. Well, here we were already at 2020, or close to it.
Right.
So we started talking about we need another plan, we need to work on this, and then who would have ever thought that a pandemic was coming?
You can't really plan for those
you
things.
You can. Every 100 years you have something like that. But
well, that's right. In 1918.
With the Spanish flu,
right.
Spanish flu back then. And so here we were 100 years later. But I remember when the then director of the health department, Clay Goddard, came in and started talking. I said, no way. no way, we can't do this, it's not that bad, and that type of thing. And I remember when the very first case hit in the state and then here in Springfield, and we had a press conference, the governor flew down, and it was a big deal, and all of a sudden the whole world changed.
It sure did.
And you start looking, and
you don't really have a playbook for that,
you
do
don't. You really don't. So I read the city code, and you can appreciate this. You were mayor when the ice storm hit back in 2007.
Yes, I remember it well.
But when you have an emergency declared, and then all of a sudden, much of that responsibility rests on the mayor. And I read that, and I said, wow.
Well, they really don't send you to mayor's school, do
No,
they?
you don't. And so I remember, talk with the health department. Our hospitals were just great. Both Mercy and Cox could not have been more helpful and worked together and all of that. But that just changed everything. All of a sudden, your comprehensive plan that you're so excited about, that kind of takes a back seat.
Well, just to pause there for a second. In retrospect, if you had to do it all over again, to what extent, if any, would you change how the city handled the COVID pandemic?
That's a good question, and I've had it before, and my answer, at least from my actions, was I would not have changed a thing.
Okay.
As I look back and say what we did at the time, based on what we knew, I would not have changed anything around. You talk about the playbook. One of our predecessors, Tom, J.J. Gideon, was mayor of Springfield.
You have me at a disadvantage there.
Back at 1980, I asked the library to go back and look at the articles, the news coverage in 1918.
Okay, interesting.
And J.J. Gideon he's buried out in Hazelwood Cemetery, but he was the mayor at the time. And they gave me some articles that appeared in the paper, and you could have changed the date and the name of the disease,
right?
And it was almost the same. Mayor closes schools, hospitals, churches, prohibits all large gatherings. That was the headline.
And I'm not so sure if that situation wasn't even much worse than the COVID pandemic.
Well, in terms of the immediate impact, the hospitals at the time were exceeding their capacity. So churches, South Street Christian Church, for example, was changed into a hospital. Others were as well. And so I read that, and then I read his order, and it was ironic. You could have substituted a few things, and it was pretty similar to what we had to issue back in 20 and 21. But that said, okay, we've been here before.
I think about these issues because I've always been interested in local government. If you're running a hospital and trying to maintain the COVID outbreak, your primary mission is to save lives. On the other hand, if you are running schools or government or, city government, there's a balancing act between people being able to work and feed their families and these health concerns. And how do you strike the right balance?
That's a good question. We started talking about, do we put occupancy restrictions in? Mm-hmm. And then you start weighing the impact on businesses. And, well, who's an essential business and who's not? And boy, that's a tough call. It is balanced, and there's no real right answer. I remember our initial council meeting, we were trying to weigh through on, can this business operate or these types of businesses operate?
And the information changes all the time.
It does.
And the messaging, at least so it seems to me, from the national government was mixed from time to time.
Well, it was. The state message was mixed and the federal message was mixed. And so I can't say enough for our Springfield Greene County Health Department. It was initially Clay Goddard and then Katie Towns after he left. Both hospitals. But also in the broader sense, the chamber was very interested in making sure that we did everything we could from business, for business, and addressed their concerns. They were very, very helpful. All of the educational institutions, President Smart, Chancellor Higdon, John Jugman was superintendent of schools at the time, but even the two privates, Drury and Evangel, so much cooperation and communication, and I guess that's the key. So there weren't any surprises. People knew what you needed to do and what the other entities were doing, and so that helped tremendously. But getting that balance was so critical. And then you get into masking. Do you require that? And how controversial that became.
I don't think, well, who cares what I think? I care what you think. But how did the general public's estimation fare toward government in view of all this mixed messaging?
It was remarkably supportive. And let me give you an example of why. In 2020, when all of this hit, I was in the middle of my second term, and you looked at what the mayor's responsibilities are going to be, and I remember telling several people, I will do what I need to do.
Right.
But there's no way I can run for a third term and be successful. If you make these decisions, I said, and I'm willing to do that. But I remember I got some feedback and some polling, and the word was, you should run again. And so it was remarkably supportive. Now, we had, some very nasty communications, emails. People would come to council and just
a lot of frustration.
Very frustrated, very frustrated. I would go to the grocery store, and you stand out in line because they had so many that they could have in, and people would say, thank you for doing this. I mean, they knew who you were.
Well, it makes you feel proud of our community,
well,
doesn't
it does. The community stepped up. And again, I could not be more proud of what government did, what private entities did, what our education community did, what the health community did. So it's an easy answer. I would not have changed anything based upon what I know now and what I knew then.
That certainly threw a wrench in the works in terms of what your plans were. So where are we now? What are you trying to get done in view of that imposed delay?
Well, our comprehensive plan was completed, and it's been adopted. Very thorough, very complete, far more detailed than I ever dreamed possible. If you read it, it's good material to put you to sleep at night. But it's very, very good on giving us a direction, and we're going to be needing to change our zoning requirements, our codes, and that process is going on right now. So that's going to give us the direction that we need. We had some major things happen in 2023. The city purchased Hammond's Field.
Thank you for your efforts on that.
Well, that was 5 years.
Some people feel like maybe you had a bit of a conflict because of your love of baseball there.
Well, I will admit that I do love baseball, and I love going there. But
I'm just pulling your leg.
Yeah, the threats were real that the Cardinals would leave not only on their own volition, but they may have been mandated to do so by Major League Baseball because of the condition of the stadium.
Yes.
So after 5 years, it ended up where it should. A 15-year commitment from the Cardinals, a 10-year professional development license from Major League Baseball. So that was major. And then you had...
And when you're in heaven someday, you can look back. If we ever do lose the ball field, you'll say, well, it didn't happen under my watch.
Well, that's exactly right. I said, I do not want to be the mayor that lost the Cardinals. And he said that half in jest, but we were able to get that done. A little thing called Buc-ee's came up.
Oh, golly. Have you been out there?
I have. I was there the day that it opened, and we were there.
I had no idea.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It sure is.
Well, the first one, only one right now in the state of Missouri. I think they're looking at some other locations in Kansas City and St. Louis, but we're the only one and the first one. And they say there will be, I forget the number, but cars that stop there.
A lot of sales tax dollars.
A lot of sales tax. They're going to do $30 million worth of revenue. So that's in the city. We were able to annex that in. So, I was very, very pleased with that. So we need to carry out the comprehensive plan. We need to focus on housing. That's a real challenge. I'm not at all happy with the percentage that we have of home ownership in our community. And we're going to have a little more rental more than normal because of what we've got with higher education. If you go up and down,
that's a good point.
You go up and down Kimbrough from Missouri State, you see all the apartments, the student housing, that's there. And I understand that, but at the same time, you want to make it possible and affordable for people to get that home.
Right.
And that's a challenge. So we did a housing study, money well spent, to look at that, and came out, we've got 40% home ownership in this community.
Well, let me push back on that figure, for example. Yeah, I'm familiar with those figures about the low rate of home ownership, let's say it that way. Sometimes it seems to me that when we're throwing around numbers like that, we're really not taking a big picture, because nobody can, unless you're the mayor, you don't know where city limit starts and where it stops. And if you live a half mile outside of Springfield, you still say you live in Springfield. And, the statisticians, the economists, they look in terms of what they call MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. So my question is this. If you were to remove what I'll call sort of the artificial boundaries of the city, are we really doing that poorly?
No, we're not.
Yeah.
Your point's well taken. And it comes up in so many different settings. For example, if we talk about the poverty rate in the city,
Yeah.
Well, it's higher than it would be if you take into account those areas where people just live across the...
There's no more room.
Right, there's no more room. Talk about crime statistics, for example. It changes dramatically if you take that in. So your point is well taken, Tom. It's well taken.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't work on addressing it, but...
So there's a group that was set up. Richard Ollis, who served on council,
Right.
Is heading it. Restore SGF.
And Richard grew up on the north side of town, has a love affair with those people.
He does.
His family started on commercial. His business started on Commercial Street.
He says he went to Boyd, Pipkin, and Central. But he's had a passion for that. And so this Restore SGF group is, he can speak for himself, but I think really that's the reason he did not seek another term on council, because he wanted to do this, and I'm happy for him. But focusing on taking some historic middle neighborhoods and trying to encourage their restoration,
Right.
purchase of homes in those areas. And they've identified 4 areas, I believe, in town where their initial focus is. And so I'm excited for that. That's the right emphasis, and you've got the right man leading it, but there's a good board, and they just hired Brendan Griesmer, who left the city after 27 years in our planning department, to head that. So,
Well, he's just the right person
he
to do
is. Oh, he is. I was so pleased that I hated to lose him at the city, but it's a great addition over there. We have Councilwoman Horton is wanting to include housing as a council priority. We're going to have a discussion on it here in a couple of weeks and see where that goes and what it looks like. And if that happens, what does that mean council does? And I don't know the answer to that yet, but trying to take some of that into account.
I mean, we're always dealing with these sort of issues. You know, the Bible says the poor will always be with you. And I don't mean to suggest by that we shouldn't be concerned and do all that we can. But let me ask you, maybe from 30,000 feet, what are the main drivers to having a prosperous, a growing Springfield that's going to be a place that's going to create jobs for our kids and our grandkids?
We need to promote continued education, and that may be taking the form of skills training. A good example is the Center for Advanced Manufacturing over at the Ozark Technical Community College, which is providing skilled training for jobs that employers say they need. In my opinion, we've got a lot of people who are what I would call underemployed. And that may be intentional, and maybe that they don't have the education, don't have the schooling, they don't have the skill set.
Right.
But if we can provide that, then that provides, I think, an upward path for a lot of people.
Well, now you were a vice president at Missouri State for some time, got an up-close and personal look at that. People have always pushed for your college degree. Where do you come down on that issue?
Well, I think it depends on the person.
Okay.
It really does. There are a lot of people going to Missouri State and elsewhere that probably don't need a 4-year degree.
Okay.
So I'm a strong proponent of technical training, skills training. I needed a 4-year degree in order to have any kind of worthwhile chance.
Well, you were never that good with your hands anyway, were you?
I never was. I didn't do very well in shop, I will tell you that. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying not everybody needs a 4-year degree. And that's different from when I was growing up, and probably you too. You know,
Right.
You got to go to college if you're going to mount anything.
Well, that was the message.
And I don't think that's true. You know, look at OTC, how much it's grown with its student enrollment, but what it's done in the community, I'm just amazed to see that. And that seems to be a solution for a lot of things. And if you go over to that Center for Advanced Manufacturing, it's a great story to tell because you have that skills training. And that's one thing we've got to do, make those opportunities available, because people that are underemployed can get a better job and a more secure career for them.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, I'm Ryan Collins. I'm the Business and Economic Development Reporter at the Springfield Daily Citizen. Pretty much born and raised in Springfield. I went to Glendale High School. I graduated from the University of Missouri with degrees in journalism and economics, hired directly by Bloomberg News right after college. It's been very refreshing to come back to Springfield, report on the city. I think one of the best aspects of my job is just being in the know. I'm constantly in touch with people all across different types of companies. And I think we have a lot of moving parts right now that are trying to work together, and I feel very lucky to try to cover that. After my week, I spend time with my dog. I definitely try to get out in nature. We go out to Busick or somewhere like that. Nash. He's named after my favorite economist, John Nash.
Well, that kind of makes me think in terms of segueing into economic incentives, tax breaks, and that sort of thing. My sense when I was involved was those were always nice ornaments to have on a Christmas tree. But the big reason that somebody decided to locate a business in Springfield was the workforce or its location. What's your sense?
It's a combination of both. For example, we went through, I think, a very good and reasoned process with Buc-ee's. We needed to do work out there to change that intersection to make it available. And that worked.
Well, in a sense, they're paying for it.
They are paying for it over time. And that, to me, is the best use of the economic development incentives.
Right.
But a key part is having, one, an available workforce, and then one that's either trained or can be trained.
Right.
And with labor shortages, that's been a challenge, although we're not unique in that. But I was pleased as new business comes in, they're able to hire.
Do you think we are overly generous when it comes to tax breaks?
I do not. I do not. And I'm looking at a broader sense on this, Tom, not just Springfield. I'm looking at the state as a whole and what comes out of state incentives that the Department of Economic Development can offer. And you compare those with a lot of states, particularly those in the South. We pale by comparison.
Right.
And so you get into that argument of welfare for the rich and all of that. I don't buy that. You have to carefully craft each case on its own, I think. And I think at least the ones that I've been involved with as city, I think we have done that. But I don't think we're overly generous.
You know, it's a hot topic. I guess the voters of Missouri have settled that matter, but my recollection was a lot of businesses that we wanted to come to Missouri just flew over because of the right to work laws.
Right to work, and I've never weighed in on that one way or the other. But we've seen that in how controversial it is, and the voters have spoken pretty clearly on that. My own personal experience is listening to business leaders talk, it varies. Some will tell you that it's not an issue, and others will tell you we won't go there. Mm-hmm. So the truth is probably somewhere in between.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of business that's gone south where the unions aren't as strong.
Well, and that gets into what we're talking about, where the incentives tend to be better in the South, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Clearly, for a long time, particularly in St. Louis and Kansas City, we had a strong labor movement presence. That declined a little bit, but it popped back up when the voters acted on right to work a few years ago.
Right.
And you saw just how strong, maybe below the surface, maybe not quite as evident as it used to be, but it's clearly there still.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure projects. What's going on with Jordan Creek?
Well, that is an exciting one, and if we can pull that off, and I believe we will, it will be a great addition to the downtown area. Jordan Creek has, it's been covered since the 1930s, I guess, a long time.
There's an old saying, Ken, today's problems are a result of yesterday's solutions. It used to be uncovered, all grassy and stuff, and then progress said, well, we need to concrete it over. And now, 50, 100 years later, we're tearing it out and doing it all over again.
Well, the main driving force, at least from the city standpoint, is stormwater.
Yeah.
And the need to take care of that. And you referenced my employment at Missouri State. Well, I was vice president there when we bought or initially leased what's now known as Brick City, which is down there, the old ice house.
It's been great for downtown.
But flooding was tremendous. Every time a big rain came in, then you're down in the basement and all of that. And the E-Factory, which is a great addition, the old turkey plant, and former to that was a postal, but it's in the floodplain, and it would flood.
Right.
And so you've got to address that downtown. So if you're going to do that, the solution now is let's uncover it. Well, if we're going to uncover that,
let's make it pretty.
Let's make it an amenity, a place where people want to come. It's not going to be like the Riverwalk in San Antonio, but the similar concept. A place will be where it will be attractive down there. So it needs to happen primarily because of the stormwater emphasis, but it's going to be something, I think, with which our community will be proud.
Construction's always subject to certain vagaries and delays, but if it worked out like you hope, what would Jordan Creek Revisited look like in a year?
Well, you need to go a little bit beyond a year, but in the ensuing months, it will be something that flows. It will be something that will be to go down. You can have a park-like area, you can have concessions, you can have whatever you want down, but a place where people will want to come and spend time.
That'd be great.
And that'll be just north of the square. Boy, what a great addition down there.
Right.
And
well, I'm excited about that as somebody that's worked downtown since 1979. I've seen it all. It'll be great to see that happen. What about Lake Springfield and decommissioning the power plant? You guys want to spend $1 billion? Have you got that?
Well, I want somebody. I want somebody to spend $1 billion. We don't have that. It's a great idea and concept, and the decommissioning of the power plant, and that's been there since 1957, long exceeding anybody's expectations on what it could do. But now that that's down, let's make Lake Springfield something more than it now is, and it's served a real purpose. I start on that with the boathouse. The Parks Department runs that, and that's nice. The area's nice. You can go out there and have a nice time, nice run, nice walk, that type of thing. But it ought to be something more than that, and I think using that power plant as somewhat of we don't have $1 billion. It's going to take a lot of private ingenuity and investment, and I think that's the challenge in the community. So I was pleased to see what they did. I'm excited about it, but we're going to have to work at it in so many different areas where you're trying to get private donations to step up and do that.
Old-timers like you and I can tell stories.
Very well.
If you're like me, you tend to repeat yourself. But I know you'll probably remember the County Line Dam fiasco.
Yes.
And Bob Roundtree wanted to dam James River up in Webster County, and it wasn't warmly received by everybody.
That's correct.
Do you see any kind of major issues with development of Lake Springfield like that, or is that probably not applicable?
Well, I think if your question is, does the dam stay, I think it does, just because of the amenity of the lake.
It's already there.
It's already there, and it changes everything. You take that out, then all of a sudden you're not necessarily talking about the lake environment.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is that the dam ought to stay. So I don't think it changes it, but you do have to look. The lake needs dredging. A lot of work done just to make that more palatable.
There's something about water, particularly in the Ozarks. I think it's an exciting concept.
Well, if you go, you can go kayak out there. Go out to the boathouse and do that, and it's right here. You don't have to go to Branson or Taneycomo. You can go right here and do that. And we've got to do a better job with that. So. City Utilities have been very great on this throughout all the power plant discussions and all that. I thought our consultant was good. It's a big price tag, so it's going to take a lot of people working at it over a long period of time. So it's probably going to be incremental.
I'm going to come back to economic development for a minute. There was a time, I think you were probably working at City Utilities as associate general manager in those days, where there was what I would call a tribe arrangement between the utility, the city, and the Chamber of Commerce development arm. Essentially, the way I would characterize it, the city and the utility had what they call patient capital. If you want to build an industrial park, you can't wait until there's demand for it, because it could evaporate or business go somewhere else. So the city and the utility would put in the infrastructure. They could help buy the land, and then the Chamber of Commerce was involved in marketing all that. Maybe you can tell me how to read the tea leaves. It seems like we're questioning that structure now.
I have been concerned that there is still an element of opposition to growth in our community.
Okay.
And I've seen that pop up a few times, and I've expressed that. I'm not saying anything I haven't said before. The structure worked.
Yeah, it worked
well, not only in the eastern one, but PIC West, which
Partnership Industrial Center West.
I remember I was on the Public Service Commission at the time that debate started. I was kind of
Was that right?
I was
Okay.
watching it from afar. But the whole reason the utility was involved was to get the load factor up.
Right, and then that reduces the argument, at least, as it reduces everybody else.
Well, it does,
rate.
because your peak is not as high.
Yeah.
And you set your rates based upon your peak. So I got that at the time, and I thought the undue criticism was unfortunate, in my opinion. But it talked really about the growth of the community and what we needed to do. And, of course, Zenith leaving was the key to that, or at least started
the catalyst, yeah.
But I even saw some opposition when Buc-ee's announced that it was coming, which said, okay, we're not quite past this.
Don't you think the pendulum swings?
Oh, it absolutely does.
Yeah.
It absolutely does. But we as a community have got to grow, continue to grow. We had 6+% population increase with the last census. That's good. It's could be better. But we need to continue to grow. I don't want us to get in this situation where if we don't grow, then you get into a spiral that you don't want to get into. So that's one of the things that I want at least to leave as a part of my legacy is that we've got to grow. We've got to continue to do that. I don't want the elements of the debate 30 years ago at the Partnership Industrial Center East to be back in, because ultimately growth, competition, the jobs that come with that are good for all of us.
Well, that's a good segue into this possible continuation of the 3/4 tax that thus far has been dedicated to shoring up police and fire pension plan. Just me being the devil's advocate, is that a little aggressive? I mean, we told the voters it was for this, and now we're talking about continuing it forever.
The tax itself expires March 31 of 2025, a 5-year tax, and all $45 million that come in from that go to the Police Fire Pension Fund. We are at 90.7% actuarially funded.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. And if you go back to where we were,
40% or something?
So it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And if you compare it with the local government employees one is 94 point something. Public school retirement, which is also thought of highly, is at 85%. So we're doing well. We're not at 100%, and to me 100% is illusory. If we're 100% today and you retire tomorrow, we're not at 100%.
Right.
But we have a declining number of police and firefighters that are in the fund. They will be retiring over the next several years. $45 million a year, we don't need that for the Police Fire Pension Fund. And when it was renewed in 2019, I never said it would reach 100% during the next 5 years, but I said I do not see a need to have to renew it at that level. And I still think that. That being said, we're still going to have an ongoing annual obligation for a few years of $3 to $5 million for that fund. And so that, to me, says you let the tax expire, and you can go back to the voters and ask, would you be willing to consider a new tax at the same level that would be used for this, this, and this? And I see a big distinction between the police fire pension tax, which will expire next March, and asking the voters for a new one. Again, $3.5 to $5 million a year we're going to have to fund. And if we don't have the sales tax revenue to fund that, then that'll have to come out of the operating budget. And you were there when those difficult times were there. So that's a good opportunity to go back and say, let's do this. Public safety has to be an initiative. You know, I've been troubled. We're down 60 officers. We're doing our best to recruit, but it's a challenge. It's not unique to Springfield. St. Louis is down 300 and something like that. Doesn't make it right, but it's a fact. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to attract and keep police officers. So public safety emphasis would have a big part of that. The third area, if you did it, would be capital needs coming out of the comprehensive plan. Basically, we've got this plan in place. These are things that we can do. Roadways is always something that needs stormwater and drainage treatment, or something that we can't fund right now.
Well, let me ask you, what's our cap? How much space is there left over and above the 3/4 cents of our ability for total tax rate?
We are at a total tax rate of 8.1%, and we can go higher. I'm hesitant to throw out the number because I'll say the wrong one.
But there's a little room.
There is room. I have seen those numbers, but again, I don't want to state anything
I'm
incorrect.
told that our tax rate is not out of line with other cities in the state.
It is not. And if you look just within the surrounding communities, Ozark, Nixa, we're the lowest of the three.
Okay.
So we're at 8.1% total. In terms of the term of the tax, I have no issues at all with putting a sunset on a tax unless you use any of it for personnel or administrative costs. So if you were to decide to do that, for example, for the public safety initiative, I wouldn't want somebody's job depending upon whether or not a sales tax is renewed.
That makes sense.
So that's kind of changed my thinking on this.
Personally, and who cares what I think, I think there's some to be said for holding government accountable for doing what they say they're going to do.
Exactly.
And having to come back every few years.
I agree with that. And the key on that, if you do something like that, is how do you measure the accountability? How do you hold yourself to the standard of what you said you would do?
Right.
And I totally agree with that. So if the decision be made to say because it would be a perpetual tax, then you've got to put accountability measures in there. And I'm not sure at this point what those would be, but those would be certainly the things you've got to do.
Sounds to me like the council's looking at the right metrics and trying to work through it.
Mm-hmm. We had a long retreat in late September, and we talked a lot about this. I was discouraged when I left there. Did not sense a consensus among council, and that's fine. Everybody has a right to their own opinion. But I really wrestled with that. What do we do? And I will be honest. My first reaction was, let's let the next mayor and council deal with it.
A pox on all your houses.
That's right. But as you start thinking through and becoming more rational on it, we've got to seek a consensus.
You sound like you're getting a little tired of herding cats.
That's a good analogy there. But we've had some good discussions one-on-one with council members, and we had a very good meeting a few weeks ago, I think. Just everybody was able to kind of set out what they're thinking. One of the issues, and I get this, the original thought was, well, it expires in April of 25 or March of 25. If you went to the ballot in April of this year, with it to become effective in April of 25, then you don't have a break. I get the confusion. That's not timely to do that. I get that. So then you start looking at other dates, August or November, and I've typically shied away from a November date just because of everything else on the ballot. But I'm thinking that may be the best time if we can get a strong consensus on what we need to do. The thing driving me, I want to make sure we at least take care of that $3 to $5 million commitment that we're going to continue to have to the pension fund.
One of the big things I wanted to talk to you about was the pros and cons of changing the term of mayor. Tell our listeners what the issue is and how you feel about it.
Well, it won't impact me. Try to make that very clear. My tenure is through, but as you know, the mayor's limited to 4 consecutive 2-year terms.
Right.
My first year in office, I was in Greenville, South Carolina, and I met with a man by the name of Knox White, and you may have heard of him. He was the mayor of Greenville.
Okay.
Still is. He was elected initially in 1995.
Oh, goodness.
He is serving his 8th 4-year term. He will retire here in 27. He said he won't run again. But he asked what our term was. I said 2 years, and he said, my first term, I had to do some pretty tough things.
Right.
And I never would have been elected again if I'd had a 2-year term. If you have a 2-year term, you're always watching over yourself and all that type of thing. He said, I needed the time to recover. So I run 4 times for mayor. You did that as well. The only time I really felt pressured on it was the pandemic year, where I did feel vulnerable. But if you look at it, we are the largest city in the state with a 2-year term. St. Louis mayor has a 4-year term with no term limits. The Kansas City mayor has a 2 4-year term limit, 8 years. Jefferson City is 4 years. St. Charles is 4 years with no term limits. Some cities have a 3-year term. Columbia does, Raymore does. Nixa, one of our neighbors, has a 3-year term. We have 2. And I haven't been the one pushing this. There have been others in the community, even back when I was initially elected. We've got to give you 4 years.
Well, it is exhausting to have to run every 2 years.
Well, it is, and you know how that is.
Right.
And you're always looking over your shoulder. And so I asked myself, would I have done some things differently if I knew I had a 4-year term as opposed to 2? And the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're always weighing the consequences. So I support it. I've been very careful to stay out of the debate on this. I don't want anybody to think it's me pushing it, because it has no impact at all on me. And I don't want it to turn into a referendum on me. But I do think it's fair, since we know we'll have a new mayor next year, to have that person know whether they're running for 2 years or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
The discussion will continue. If it's going to change, it needs to change when you know you're going to have a new mayor. It's more difficult, I think, if somebody's in office and then they all of a sudden run for a 4-year term as opposed to 2. Council members, of course, have a 4-year term, and they have no term limit. Council members here can run as long as they wish and can be elected, and the mayor cannot. I get that, and I'm ready to be done, let me say that. But I do think it's a little more difficult when you've got 2 years, particularly if you have to do something that's controversial.
You know, to me, it's sort of you're grafting an alligator onto a duck. As you well know, under council manager form of government, our current government was established, I think, in 1953. And the mayor was elected by council members.
Yes.
And they patterned it after the way a private corporate board would work. Then, fast forward 25 years or so, Jerry Slavens, who was a very influential council person, believed in a strong mayor form of government. And so he got the charter changed. The voters had to approve it, of course, to have the mayor elected for a 2-year term by the people. But in the average mind of a Springfieldian, the mayor has some authority. Well, not too much.
Not too much. People think you can do about anything.
Right. And, you know, I don't think the voters would, once you've told them they can elect the mayor, I don't think it would ever change. But there have been times, as I look back, where the person who's elected mayor doesn't necessarily have the majority support of council. And so it can result in confused messaging, where if the mayor were to be appointed by the council, for one thing, you wouldn't have to be running out all the time. And it would maybe reflect the current mood of the community. Having said that, it's an academic exercise. I don't think it'll ever go back. But maybe my last question, Ken. This form of government is more and more uncommon the bigger cities grow. They tend to get a little more political. Well, you've certainly seen that just in fundraising for elections. Are we reaching the point where maybe this form of government is going to be less popular and the people are going to want to change?
I hope not. We're still nonpartisan. You don't run for mayor or council as a Democrat or a Republican.
I think. There's no such thing as a Republican pothole.
No, there's not. The potholes have to be fixed. I value that. I do think it's time for us to look at council members aren't paid anything. Mm-hmm. The mayor gets $200 a month. Is it time to maybe change that a little bit? And you don't want to make it so high that you run for the money, but at the same time, you don't want people to not be reimbursed for things. I hope we're not that way, because I think if we get to that point, Tom, then it does become partisan. And I think that would be the worst thing for this city, regardless of what your political preferences are in the legislative and the state and federal government. I think this is something that's good for here, and I hope it doesn't change. Your question's a fair one, and I think about that a lot. We continue to grow, then does our form of government need to change? If it changes and you get rid of the city manager, the council manager form, then you have a full-time mayor. You have to pay them appropriately, and then you have them responsible for appointing the police chief and the fire chief and the planning chief and everybody. Is that what we want? I don't think that's what we want.
To me, I tend to agree with you. At least still at this point, I think our community has too much of a collaborative nature.
Well, we do, and that's a strong point that we have. You know, very little of any consequence happens in this community without a lot of folks weighing in on it.
Right.
and that's good.
Yeah. Ken, it's been lovely talking to you today. I could go on, but we're getting close to our end. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we
No,
wind it
I
up?
just appreciate being invited to come on here, and I appreciate your friendship. You know, you've served our community so well over a long period of time, and you're the standard. You know, when people talk, Mayor Carlson's the standard.
Okay, all right.
But I mean that.
You're very kind. Thank you for being today's guest on In Our Town.
Thank you.
That's it for this week, and many thanks for listening. If you'd like to listen to other episodes, you can visit the Springfield Daily Citizen website at sgfcitizen.org/In Our Town, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.